3 decades ago, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers captured my imagination. Like many of my fellow 90s kids, I watched after school, joined the official fan club, and of course, collected the toys. Eventually, I put those toys away, but the flame of my Power Rangers fandom never died. Now, in this milestone 30th anniversary year, I am re-examining the show, its legacy, and the tale of its most legendary ranger across media. It's time to get back to action. Welcome to the penultimate episode of Summoning the ZORDS, a Power Rangers fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to rip some velocity as we shift into Turbo is returning guest Chris DeLando. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. The velocity will be ripped, be shredded.
Man, that line really made an impression, as did a lot in what we're going to be talking about. Speaking of which, we took a look at 1997's Turbo, a Power Ranger movie. And we also looked at selections from the Turbo season, specifically the Shift into Turbo 3-parter that kicked off the Turbo season, and the Passing the Torch 2-parter about midway through the Turbo season. Now, for me, all of this was brand new. This has been a gap. Turbo has been a gap in my Power Rangers fandom hanging over me for decades, and especially over the course of doing this podcast. And I was purposely saving it to do it for the show when we got here. And we've made it at last, and I'm very happy to have you here. And on that note, let me toss it to you. What has your experience been with this material, especially that movie? I take it you experienced this live as it was happening back in the day.
Oh yeah, I saw it opening weekend in the theater in '97, and I mean I mentioned this on the last episode that we did about the Boom comics, but I was like that kid in your school who hung on to Power Rangers way too long. And so I went to an elementary school, like kindergarten through 5th grade. And I have this core memory of our bus route. Like I had the same bus route my entirety of elementary school. And so same kids, we all kind of like grew up together riding the bus. And I remember everyone being so very excited for the first movie. It was the talk of the school. We talked about it on the bus. The trailer came out. Everyone was like speculating and stuff. And then I distinctly remember by the time Turbo came around, which is like 2 years later, I was the only one. Like nobody wanted to talk about it. And I was like, what do you mean? Like we love Power Rangers. What are you talking about? And everyone was like, no, we moved on. Like, and I, that was just so foreign to me. So like, I definitely, I have a weird soft spot for this, and I bounced off after this. I watched a lot of In Space, and that was kind of my last hurrah. But so I definitely have a lot of nostalgia for this movie, and will defend it, even though, as I'm sure we'll talk about, it's not very good at all.
It's not. There were some things that I liked about it, and I'm happy to talk about that. There was a lot of stuff that was a bit mystifying, but going back to what you were just sharing about your experience, what's crazy to me is that not only did I not see this movie ever, but especially when it was coming out, I have been racking my brain. I don't even have any memory of knowing about it. And it's like, how could I not have? But I mean, I'm telling you, I have zero recollection of anything to do with this movie when it was coming out. Now, from the first episode of this podcast, the history that I remembered of my Power Rangers fandom was that I fell off about midway through Zeo because I was getting a little bit older. I was in 4th grade, and other kids in my class, like you were talking about, most of them had kind of dropped off, and there were only a few of us left, and it didn't feel kind of cool, and maybe I was just kind of losing interest. That was my memory. But then as I'm going through all the Zeo stuff, it's all coming back to me. And I'm like, no, I watched essentially the entire season because I had a vivid memory of how they wrote out Billy and all that Aquitar business and everything. Maybe I missed the last episode or two of Zeo because I really didn't remember them, but essentially I watched all of Zeo, and that season wrapped up in fall 96, and then the Turbo movie came out in March 97. And I don't have any memory of ever saying, like, I'm done with Power Rangers, right? So it's just like, how did I not know about this? How did I not see it? I texted my mom yesterday. I was like, okay. So I wanted to give her the context. All right, the 95 movie, we saw that in theaters. Dad brought home a bootleg VHS from the city. There were the McDonald's toys. We saw that. 2 years later, there was this other thing. Do you remember seeing a commercial or a poster or me ever saying anything about it? No, nothing. Gave me nothing. That was my one my one chance to maybe get some insight. So I have no idea what happened to me.
Well, I'm like a habitual, like, I'm box office tracker, and I this movie felt big to me, although it definitely felt less on the scale from the first one. But I was looking, in my doing my research for this and rewatching it, I was like, well, how did this do at the box office? It ate shit. It did terrible. It did like less than $10 million total gross. Like, that's horrible.
Yeah, I looked that up too on IMDb, and so it had an estimated budget of 8 million, and it brought in just about 9 million worldwide. So yes, this did not do well.
It's terrible. A huge flop.
Well, so maybe that helps account for it, right? If it just kind of came and went. And also, look, in fairness, it's not the internet age that we live in now where we're bombarded with all of this stuff. So it's possible I just somehow missed a trailer or a poster or a commercial on TV. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that it just escaped my notice, especially if I kind of thought I was done. You know what's funny though? I was thinking about this. We talked about the bridge from Mighty Morphin to Zeo. And I think they did a great job with that. They kept you along for that ride, and you had the Alien Ranger mini series and all that stuff, and you just were along for the ride all the way through. Between Zeo and Turbo, definitely more of a break, and maybe consciously or subconsciously, I picked up on that. Like I got to the end of Zeo, and it was just like, oh, okay, this is it. Not, you know what I mean? I knew that the franchise continued, but maybe because they weren't kind of transitioning us the way they did between Mighty Morphin and Zeo, maybe that had something to do with it too.
Yeah, and I remember a lot of, when it was at its peak. There was a lot of TV guide covers and Entertainment Weekly stuff, and the White Ranger thing aired in prime time, if I remember correctly, and like a lot. It was a lot bigger than it was. The fad was starting to fade by '97, and you can feel that in this movie and the budget, and then you could certainly feel that by the time you get to the actual show. What I found really fascinating was, and maybe this has something to contribute to the box office of it all, movies had a longer tail at that time. Like, movies would play for longer in theaters. This movie came out in like late March '97, if memory serves.
Mm-hmm.
And then the show premiered 2 weeks later, which is pretty cool when you really think about it. But, I could very much see someone being like, well, I don't need to go see the movie because the show's on now.
Oh, that's a fair point. Yeah, maybe that has something to do with it too. So maybe on that note, and I'm not breaking any new ground here. When people, I've noticed fans talk about this, a few points tend to come up, and I don't disagree with any of this. Whereas the '95 Mighty Morphin movie really felt like an event and had a bigger budget and built new sets and had a different aesthetic, and we had the armored costume look, and for better or worse, probably worse, the CGI Zords, but it really was its own thing. And of course, it didn't fit into the continuity of the show, right? When the next season of Mighty Morphin picked up, we had a whole arc about how they got ninja powers in a completely different way. So you could just skip over the movie. Why would you? Because it's amazing if you're a fan of the franchise at that time. But you could skip right over it and you just follow the Mighty Morphin seasons and you're good to go. This, on the other hand, followed the continuity of the show, and in terms of budget and look and feel, definitely feels far more in line with the show. It feels like an extension of the TV show, more like a TV movie version of Power Rangers than the big budget extravaganza that the '95 movie was. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I clocked that while I was rewatching it, and for me as a fan, I certainly dug that, and I remember liking that a little bit more as a kid too. I remember thinking that, like, oh, this is a direct continuation. This will lead directly into the show. This is more in canon, and I think when you're that age, you don't really have as much of a sense of like budget and why things look cheap, or if they look cheap, you're just kind of happy to be along for the ride. So I distinctly do remember liking that the suits looked more like Power Ranger suits, because I mean, even at the time, I remember not particularly being fond of the armor costumes from the original movie. So having that like continuity, for lack of a better term, I remember enjoying, and I still enjoyed it upon the rewatch here too.
Right on. Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of thing. I was saying it more as a negative towards Turbo, but I can appreciate the other perspective where again, that 95 movie really felt like its own thing. This felt like part of the show, and it was, and it looked like it. So there's something to be said for that. So in case anyone needs a little refresher about what this is all about, Turbo, a Power Rangers movie, introduces Divatox, the galactic pirate, who is seeking to get her hands on the wizard Laragor, who has the key to this dark dimension, and this creature Malagor, who Divatox wants to marry and rule the universe with. And in order to gain leverage over the Rangers and provide a sacrifice to Malagor, Divatox abducts former Rangers Kimberly Hart and Jason Scott. So that's sort of our jumping off point. And in the process, the Rangers are granted these new turbo powers and Zords. Anything in particular
Out of
that
nowhere.
out of
Out of
nowhere?
nowhere.
Yes. Yeah. I guess I know you said you'll always defend this. How often, if at all, have you rewatched this over the years, and did you still feel the same after rewatching it now?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like a perennial rewatch for me by any stretch of the imagination, but I've probably seen it, including the rewatch for this. I would say I've probably seen it like 4 to 5 times since 1997. So like not like super regularly, but if it pops up on a streaming service or like it was on HBO or whatever, I would watch it and enjoy it. The vibe that I like about this movie that does not exist in both the first movie or the show for that matter is this movie fails at it but has a lot of DNA of 80s 90s adventure movies, and you can see that they were going for like a fantasy adventure. It's got that like we have Star Wars at home opening crawl. It's got a lot of like Goonies energy. It actually, it feels like the Dolph Lundgren Masters of the Universe, another bad movie I really enjoy. Not only because they both have a tiny little goblin wizard with a mystical key as like the main plot thrust of the movie, but there's like a swashbuckling adventure vibe to this movie. And when we get into like a lot of the stuff that got cut out or hit the cutting room floor, they were clearly going for that. And then they were like, we got to make this, 87 minutes or whatever. We got to get these kids in and out.
That is a great point. That I know when I said earlier there were a couple of things I liked. That was actually one of the things I was going to say, that it does feel like there's this grand sense of adventure that the movie is trying to conjure for you. And they're driving across the desert and they're riding this ghost ship across the water, and then they're in the jungle and the volcano, and there's a lot of there are a lot of attempts, I think, to really create that sense of adventure. And to whatever extent it succeeds or fails, I do appreciate the attempt to try to do something like that. So that part I'll give them. Let me also say this. I didn't mention this in my little recap, but this movie also introduces a new ranger, little Justin, a child who is granted Rocky's place on the team when Rocky is injured and Steve Cardenas was leaving the franchise. We'll talk more about that. But over the years, I've heard really nothing but negative things about Justin and how he was really irritating and was a poor addition to the team. And maybe that set my expectations so low. But I watched this and the few episodes of Turbo. He's far from my favorite character in the franchise, to be clear, but I did not find him nearly as grating or as off-putting as I feel like I was led to believe. I didn't mind him all that much.
Yeah, so I remember like vehemently hating the kid when I was a kid. And now that I'm a bit older and my edges have softened a little bit, I'm like, it wasn't really that bad. And maybe it's because we've been shoveled so much shit by other properties for like nigh on 20 years that like that seems tame by comparison, perhaps. But even in a bubble, it's not, like you said, it's not great, but I can see the editorial machinations behind the scenes of like, we got to get a kid in here so that the kids can relate.
That's the fascinating, hilarious thing about all of this, because yeah, you definitely get the sense that's exactly the thought process. Like, hey, kids watch this, right? And if we put a kid in there, they'll love it. It'll be like they're watching themselves. They can pretend that they're a Power Ranger. But I think what they missed is that there was something about seeing characters who were slightly older, right? Not fully grown adults, the characters at least, maybe the actors, but the characters at least, right? Were just a few years ahead of where we were watching it. And I think that was the sweet spot. So I definitely think that was a miscalculation. Now, of course, one of the goofy aspects of all of this is that when little Justin morphs, right? He enlarges to the size of an adult male, yet still has the voice of a child. And correct me if I'm wrong, anytime the helmet comes off, he's just a kid again, correct? There's never an instance where you see him, right?
Yep. Yep.
So I spent way too much time thinking about this, but in my head, like as I was watching this, I thought to myself, "Oh, is the idea, he ages up and then he goes, but I don't think that's it. I think the implication is just that his body just
Just
grows."
gross. Yeah, it's like a He-Man thing. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. Speaking
Yeah.
another He-Man reference. Yeah, and it's really funny when they always show like in the show specifically. I think they do it in the movie too, but the actual like morph sequence, he morphs like everybody else, and then just like little CGI legs extend. You know what I mean? He just grows like 2 feet.
Yes. And the actor, Blake Foster, was and is a martial artist. And so when you see Justin mixing it up and stuff, it's like he has the move. So I don't know. Like I said, I wasn't that put off. Although, I was sad to see Rocky go. I was always a fan of the Rocky, Adam, and Aisha trio. Of course, we had long since said goodbye to Aisha. But at the beginning of the Turbo movie, right, the Tommy and Adam and Rocky, they're practicing for this martial arts tournament, right? They're raising money for charity. And, we meet Justin. He's on the bus, right, for this children's shelter. And we learn his
Little
mother.
Angel's Haven.
Yes. Yes, yes. And his mother had passed away, and we learned later his father, was having some sort of certain issues. And was it a karate school that he was running?
Yeah, like his dad owns a dojo. In my research here, there was like a little bit more of a grim version of this earlier in some early scripts where he was a total orphan, and had like grafted onto Rocky as sort of like a paternal figure, which kind of explains that a little bit. And we could talk about this for sure, but like a lot of those character moments just are completely excised from the movie. There's really nothing to kind of latch onto in that regard.
Yes. Yeah. I definitely want to talk about what was cut from this, but I just not to not to nitpick, but the scene at the beginning where they're practicing, and they're very intense, right, in their martial arts preparation here. And I feel like their sensei, I suppose would be the term, but the guy in the corner who's kind of giving them their direction, I feel like all he keeps saying to them is "Get in there, get in there, get in." And I'm watching this. It's like, is that all you have to say? I mean,
Just got to get in there, man.
you just got to get in there. I mean, look, this is a foreign world to me, other than watching Cobra Kai, but I don't do it myself. But it's just like, I don't know, move your feet, keep your hands up, anything. All this guy keeps saying is "Get in there."
Well, he clearly gives bad directions because Rocky does a spinning back heel kick that sends him 14 feet in the air and over the top rope.
That was insane. So Adam is like, maybe we were trying too hard, and then Rocky's like, maybe we're not trying hard enough. He does this kick, and it's like you're supposed to feel for the character in this moment, but it was just so overly dramatic and over the top that it's so comical. He's just like instantaneously thrown from the ring and hurts his back. It's just, oh man, ridiculous.
Listen, as a fellow like back problem survivor, I can empathize with the guy here for sure, but also at the same time, he's a trained martial artist and a superhero. I would think that like an 8-foot fall wouldn't really do him in too much.
Yeah, and also again, this they were practicing. I don't know why this was so intense. Now behind the scenes, and I shout out to one of our listeners, Will, I believe, who sent me a clip from an appearance that Steve Cardenas made on the podcast hosted by the actresses who play Kat and Tanya. I don't know if you've seen this, but they do their own show.
No, I haven't. Yeah.
And he was on there and he was talking about why he left. And as he relates it, as they were heading into this turbo season, he wanted all of the Rangers to be paid the same. So I guess it was tiered, right? Because obviously, Jason David Frank had been there the longest, and then, Cardenas and Johnny Young Bosch and so on. And so his idea was for all of them to get paid the same, and the producers didn't go along with that, and so he decided to leave, but they convinced him to stick around for that that little bit of turbo the movie, and then those first couple of episodes of the season to wrap up his character as much as they
Seems
actually
to
did.
be a recurring theme of the Power Rangers franchise of the hey, we would really like more money. Okay, great, you are fired.
Yeah, here's the door. Here you go.
Yeah.
That's
Here's
great.
the World Teen Peace Summit.
Yeah, I know. It's unfortunate, but yes, it is definitely something that we've seen happen over and over. Going back to what you were saying before about Justin, and I think this applies to everything. One of the things that is disappointing to me watching this is just that I feel like there were so many opportunities for some genuine character moments that as fans, even as kids, especially now, but even as kids, we would have grabbed onto. And so the idea of Rocky being hurt, for example, and having to give up his powers, not that the whole movie would be about that, right? I guess we were lucky that we even saw him for those few minutes, but I don't know if there could have been a little bit of something there, right? Because that's an interesting dynamic. We've had characters lose their powers. We went through it with Tommy as the Green Ranger. We went through it with Jason as the Gold Ranger, but kind of having to step aside due to injury, that's a new wrinkle in this. I feel like that's something that could have been explored at least a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely an easy way to put some more emotional stakes on that by having, like him be the guy who, works at the orphanage or kid shelter or whatever it's going to be, and like is taking the fact that it might close really hard, and that's why he's kind of pushing himself like we've got to win this tournament. It was, that's like 3 lines of dialogue.
Right. Well, along those same lines, and again, I don't, it's like I don't want to spend an hour and a half here just tearing apart this thing. For anyone out there who, like yourself, who really has a soft spot for this movie, that's great. I'm sure if I had seen it as a kid, I was 10 when this came out. I'm sure if I had seen it then, it would hold some more meaning for me, right? So, just folks, for
Sure.
anyone who like loves this movie, keep in mind I'm coming at this for the first time from the perspective of a 36-year-old. So it's like it doesn't. I guess I see the flaws more than I would have
Yeah,
initially.
I mean, look, it does it is pretty baffling. Like I said at the top, I am really nostalgic for this movie, and I do really enjoy it as much as the original movie. But it does make every wrong decision at every conceivable turn. Like it really does. Like every opportunity this movie has to do something cool or something to drive the plot forward or something to add emotional stakes or character beat, it whiffs it every single time. So like it really the critiques are very justified. I think I saw it when I was 9 years old, and that's where I'm coming at from it.
No, I hear you. I hear you. But what I was going to say is like one of the things that's so frustrating to me is that we bring back Jason. Of course, Jason had just been there for the end of Zio, so we had spent some time with him recently. But this was the first time we had seen Amy Jo Johnson as Kim in a really long time, and there they give us nothing between Kimberly and Tommy. And you might say, oh, well, the franchise wasn't built for that. But I would say Zio gave us that 3-part arc. There's no business like snow business. And we talked about it on the show, all about that Dear John letter that Kim sends to Tommy. They're like, oh, I love you like a brother, and I've met somebody else, blah, blah, blah. And he's heartbroken, and he goes to the mountains, and he's snowboarding, and then feelings with Kat, all that stuff starts to happen. So they had spent time on this in the show, and it could have been, to your point, as far as even just a couple of lines. Like if she had just at some point said to him, like, hey, Tommy, sorry about that letter. And he's like, oh, Kim, it's okay. It all worked out. And he looks at Kat and smiles. That's it. Like, that's all you would need. And I just don't understand how, I don't know. I just don't understand the thought process because they know, even though it's an audience of kids, it's kids who are invested in these characters and have been following along. And it's a movie. So if there's ever a time to maybe get a little bit more nuanced or a little more sophisticated, I feel like that's an opportunity for it. It's like that drove me nuts.
Yeah, there's like it's simultaneously, we were talking about this in the context of how it feels. It's a movie that feels like an extended episode of the show. It simultaneously feels like the show too much and not enough. Like there was not enough of that character dynamic stuff that they could have pulled. There's a lot of things like, I mean, this is really the ultimate send off for Rocky. Like you said, he's got a couple scenes in those first few episodes, but he's gone after this, really, and there's really nothing for him to do. Adam and Aisha really get nothing to do in this movie. It's very much like Tommy, Justin, and like Jason, I guess, gets a fair amount of screen time, but that's kind of really it.
Yeah, and there's that whole sequence where Tommy and Kat are in the jungle looking for Laragor, and again, not that I expect them to have this extended heart to heart about their budding relationship, but I don't know, something. It's just like,
Give
come
the
on.
people what they want, especially also like, I mean, I know that we had chatted about how Amy Jo Johnson was a lot of people's first crush, but I always had a thing for Catherine Sutherland too. And is this the hottest that anyone has ever looked in history in a
Yes,
movie? She's like an absolute smoke show in this movie. It's insane.
I know. If I thought this has, I had the same thought the first time we see her on the bus. I was like, whoa.
The movie makeup department is way better than the TV makeup department, clearly.
Yeah, I know. So clearly, I wanted more romance. I wanted more romantic developments. That seems to be the thrust of it. But no, and then on top of this, and we've already touched on it, but and I know we're not breaking new ground here, but it really does warrant discussion. The complete lack of an explanation for why they shift into turbo, why they abandon the Zeo powers and get these turbo powers. Now, you had mentioned this before too. We are aware there's a lot of deleted material, right? Apparently, the original cut of this was clocked in at 3 hours, right? And they trimmed it down to about an hour and 40 minutes or a little bit less. And very curiously, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the deleted scenes have never popped up anywhere.
Never. I looked hard. Never. Like the most that you've seen is like a couple of still photos from a couple of you probably found the same stuff. Like when Tommy and Kat go into the jungle or whatever, there's apparently a scene where Tommy fights a crocodile and Kat takes a flamethrower out of the power pack and shoots the crocodile, and you can see a, a still of that on the back of the VHS cover. So like things like that. But apparently there was a big subplot about them, you know, as the Zeo Rangers losing those powers and needing something to not only restore their powers, but get them through the fake Bermuda Triangle or whatever it's called.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, I think this was something that only was ever in the script stage, but the idea was that Billy would be developing the new powers for
Yeah.
them, and then of course that wasn't going to happen. But yeah, apparently they did film scenes where they the Zeo powers are destroyed or whatnot, or it's at least accounted for why they have to acquire these new powers. Again, it's like I'm glad that it was at least considered at some point. I'm glad for that. But at the same time, all we have is what they give us in this finished product here, and it's just I just it's baffling to me. I just don't understand. I know now in this current age, we all we're all poring over everything. We know so much about the behind the scenes, and we're analyzing these things. We're doing podcasts about these things, and I know it was a different time, but still, it feels to me like such an obvious question that they would and should expect the audience to have, especially because they trained us. Like, how many times have we gone through this where their power source was destroyed and they needed something new and they got the ninja powers? And then, of course, all of Zeo. It was a whole quest, literally, a quest to get the Zeo powers. And so to now not give any explanation here and expect people to just be, oh, like, yeah, they just got new powers. I get fired up about this. Like, I don't understand.
So I can only think it's one of two things, right? One, it's a budgetary thing, which is very entirely possible that they're like, we don't have the budget to film this whole big extended action sequence, which is possible. It happens to movies all the time. Or two, um, they were just like, the kids aren't going to care, which is also kind of a victim of some of these like children's programming from our era and a little bit earlier. Have you ever seen, there's a really great documentary about Masters of the Universe and like the guys who created the toys and stuff? I don't know if that was ever really your thing.
It
It's never
really
really
wasn't.
my thing either, but I've always been kind of interested and fascinated by it. And so the documentary is like all of these like older white guys smoking cigarettes and like drawing action figure diagrams. And they're like, well, what if we make one that smells bad? And they're like, why does he smell bad? And they're like, who cares? It's for kids, like, so maybe it's that kind of ethos.
No, I know. I don't mean to be difficult with this. Like I want to just go along with that. But like I said, I just feel like they trained us to expect otherwise, and then
Yeah.
they didn't follow up on it. And also, even if even if they didn't film the full sequence where the Zeo powers fail, or they did but they needed to cut it for whatever reason, even just a line or two, something. I think the other problems that I have with this are Zio, to me at least, was so cool, and they made such a big point about how they were leveling up. This was the next stage of power, right? The Zeo powers were greater than anything they had utilized before. I didn't necessarily think the Zords were cooler, but I still I liked the Zeo Zords well enough. But I love the costumes, the theme song. It's like when we went from Mighty Morphin to Zeo, it felt like, oh, this is cool, this is exciting. Zeo to Turbo does not in any way feel like a step up or even a lateral move. It's very hard to look at it and not see it as a step down.
Well, I think that that's a lot of the presentation, right? Like what you said, we're really only left with what they gave us, and what they gave us is a door opens in the command center, and they're like, "Oh, here's a bunch of new shit." And he's like, "Where's this been the whole time? Why didn't we have this from the jump? You've just been sitting on this for no reason." So like you know, like there were all those times we could have used this. So there really is. They kind of undersell it for you from the jump. Did your research into Turbo, because it's you know, you had said it was never you know, you weren't really exposed to it when it was coming out. Did you kind of dive into the Sentai series at all? Like I've never actually seen any of it, but there's a pretty fascinating reason why Turbo feels the way Turbo does. And it's because that season was apparently a parody season. And so the footage that they were stuck with, they were trying to make really dark and epic and cool like Zeo is. And it's just really silly and whimsical and stupid. So the episodes end up feeling that way by extension. And I think that really did them a huge disservice here.
That was as much as I found. I didn't watch any of this the Super Sentai equivalent for this season, but I read the same thing, and so yes, that does at least help account for you know, for some of what we got. And I can, you know, I can cut them a little bit of slack on that front. So yeah, kind of knowing what they were working with certainly gives some helpful context. I think the other thing was, so yeah, it doesn't feel like the step up. This might seem like a weird comparison, but I'll just say it because I kept thinking about it as I was watching it. You know, you and I are both lifelong comic book fans. And you're a Marvel guy. My heart's always been with DC. And, you know, DC has this unlimited, or not unlimited, that's Marvel, the DC Universe Infinite app, right? Where you can read DC comics. And before it was Infinite, the initial version of the DC app had comics and film and TV content.
I
And
remember
then
that, yeah.
when HBO Max popped up, all of the video content moved over there, and then the DC app was left solely as a comic book reader. And so they had this whole relaunch and rebrand. And it was always so weird to me that like they added Infinite to the title and they increased the price. And they made this whole thing about like now we're Infinite, and it's like you guys took stuff away and you're charging us more and calling it something far grander and trying to make it seem like this is a step up. It's not. I think they did expand the library a bit, but still, it did not it did not feel like what they were trying to tell us it was. And I get the marketing side, I get all that, but I couldn't help but think that as I'm watching this, it's like this is not
It
fair,
does feel
guys.
like a false, yeah, it does feel like a false bill of goods at a certain point. Like the costumes are not like the Zeo costumes rock. They're awesome. They look so cool. These ones less cool, you know. They're still okay, but they're not like they don't pop the way that those Zeo costumes do, or the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers costumes. Zord's kind of lame. And we could talk about this too, but you know, one of those things that you are also a big fan of the 2017 reboot film, as I am. But the biggest complaint of that movie is that you don't really see them as Power Rangers until like an hour and a half into the movie. It says this does the exact same thing. Like, and they were already Power Rangers, so there's no real excuse for you at this point. Like, they had powers the entire time, and they just really don't use them until about an hour and 15 minutes into the movie.
That is a fantastic point. And to further sing the praises of the 2017 movie, at least while they weren't morphing, they were building their relationships and you were learning about their characters. Here, it's all of the non morphing, but none of the character development. So it was weird too as I was watching it. And again, all I had was what I had read about it. So at first, it was pretty deep into it. And I was like, is it just that they don't have the Zeo powers anymore to begin with? Because when they send Tommy and Kat, I know clearly that's not the case, but as I'm watching it and they send Tommy and Kat to search for Laragor, I mean, that thing went on forever. That little creepy wizard character walking around, meeting all the animals. I was like, my son would love this. He's 4 and he's obsessed with animals. We go to the zoo all the time. I might throw it on for him, although I don't know if he might be freaked out by that Laragor.
He's pretty creepy looking,
Yeah, I was
truthfully. I
pretty
gotta
freaked
say.
out. But when they sent Tommy and Kat to search for him, they were like, take your power packs. I'm like, what the hell is a power pack?
I remember when the movie came out thinking those were the coolest fucking things on the planet. And looking back on it, I'm still like, yeah, those are pretty cool. And I wish that they made toys of those. Like, I would have bought that in a heartbeat.
It's crazy to me that they didn't. The only thing that was weird to me was it's the tiniest bottle of water you've ever
I'm
seen.
glad you brought that up. I have that in my notes. Cat takes a drink out of the tiniest glass of water. I have that. It's like a shot glass.
Maybe that's one of Zordon's rules. It's like you don't use your powers for personal gain, you don't reveal your identity, you don't escalate, and also you really got to go easy on the water. We have to
You gotta,
conserve the water.
you gotta stay dehydrated. It's how you look swole, you know?
I guess. I guess. I know. I was looking at that. It's like, it was so tiny.
When this movie came out, too, that sequence in the jungle when Cat does morph or like half morph into Zeo Pink for 5 seconds was really cool. That's kind of the movie's like straight at you insinuation that this is part of the canon. Like this is in canon. They are the Zeo Rangers. Here we go. And then it's completely dropped. What I found interesting too is like Kat and Tanya and Adam really have nothing to do, but apparently there were sort of dueling quests in the original script where like Tommy and Kat would go after Larago, and Adam and Tanya went underwater to try and rescue Jason and Kimberly, and they had like underwater armor, power suits, and stuff. And that would have been cool. It would have at least given them something to do and would have kind of lent a little bit more to this overall adventure feel of the movie. Like that kind of really always works for me is like we got to split the team up and like someone's got to go over here and do this thing and someone's got to go over there and do that thing and we're going to bounce around. It narratively always kind of like gets me going.
That's a great point. Yes, I mean that would make a lot of sense because it really felt like they were needlessly sidelined when they stayed behind in the power chamber to I don't know look for Laragor on the. It's like that's what Alpha's for, right? So that was always odd. So that would account for that. We've talked about these deleted scenes. So yeah, I came across that too. Those aquatic suits that I guess they would have worn when they went underwater. I know at one point, I guess later on, maybe when they're on the Ghost Galleon ship, there was a mermaid. There's a whole thing with a mermaid.
Whole mermaid subplot again, like big Goonies energy. Yeah, apparently there was a longer quest to find the ship, and they camped at night and couldn't find it. And Adam has like a vision in the flames of seeing Malagor, which would have been really cool. And then he kind of walks off into the jungle, finds this mermaid, and finds like a skeleton pirate that's pointing the way to the ship. So like again, like just kind of like we're sending the Rangers on a quest, whether or not they have powers. And then when you chop that all out, it's basically like we have them on a ship. That's where
Yeah,
we landed.
yeah, I know that's too bad. Was there anything else in the deleted material you came across that that really stood out to you?
Um, that piece seemed really cool. There's like that mermaid subplot, like you mentioned. The mermaid pops up a little bit later. So when Adam goes to shore at first, when they get to the island, and he's like, and the torpedoes are going for the ship. I guess the mermaid pops up and the torpedoes like divert to the mermaid or something. And so he like pulls a bungee cord out of one of those cool power packs and like jumps off the cliff and saves the mermaid. So like again, giving him a little bit more something to do. And then it seemed like the sequence, like after they finally morph in the jungle and get to the volcano or whatever, was a little bit more extended. Like there's some photos of these two of them going through like some Temple of Doomy style like chambers and things like that, which would have added sort of like that vibe to the end of it. I'm trying to see if there's anything else in my notes. Oh, when they pass through into the triangle, they see like a World War II plane and like a UFO and stuff, which also would have been really cool. Like it's like a Bermuda Triangle type thing. And then they apparently, the original script had them morphed on the ship when they fight all of those creatures, which again would have moved that up in the runtime of the movie to about half an hour in, which would have been a lot better, I think.
Yeah, I know it's kind of heartbreaking. The more the more we talk about it and learn about what could have been and what almost was, a lot of this I think would have gone a long way. You mentioned the word vibe. Speaking of vibes, there was a lot of speculation, and maybe this was in some of the deleted script or maybe film. I don't know, but the idea of a romantic, again, I'm always fixated on this, a romantic relationship between Kimberly and Jason.
I'm sure. I mean, it's from your comic book love, man. We always love when we see the X-Men kiss. We want to see them smooch as much as we want to see them fight. Like it's the best part. Um, yeah, that was allegedly sort of there on the docket, which I think would have been really cool to see. Like again, like it's rich, fertile ground for character development in this franchise that, again, admittedly is for children, but we're here now in our mid 30s talking about it, so clearly it had some resonance, and like there would have been really cool to see that happen, at least, because then you can bring them back to the show at some point and you can have Tommy deal with that. Like his former teammates, one of whom he had a romantic entanglement with, are dating now. Like how does he handle that? How does Kat handle that?
That's the thing, and I feel like it would have added so much more weight to later on when Kim and Jason are turned evil, when they're lowered into the pit and then they come out evil. And apparently Austin St. John, that was his condition for returning. He wanted to be bad.
I watched some like behind the scenes footage from this. There's like a cool making of documentary that's shot by Bulk and Skull, like on set, and a couple of, I guess, like Entertainment Tonight video interviews from the time. And all Austin St. John keeps saying, he's like, I'm going to be a villain in this one. I get to be bad. He was really, really jazzed about this idea.
I'm glad for him. I mean, it's all of a few minutes, but I'm glad whatever he got out of that. I'm glad. But what we were saying, I just feel like that would have added so much more weight to that, and especially if the evil Kimberly and Jason had more to do and more to say. You get the tiniest sliver of this when Jason grabs Tommy and has him over the edge of the pit, and he's like, "Now I'm the one with the muscle and the power."
I'm the one with the muscles.
It's like, well, he was always ripped, but anyway, but he's the muscle and the power, and he's like, yeah, but you're not using your brain power. And it's like, all right.
Not to mention his super cool hoop earring. Let's not forget Austin St. John's killer silver hoop earring.
Yeah. But yeah, again, that would have just added, I think would have added a lot to the proceedings. But at least in that moment between Jason and Tommy, you have to do a lot of the mental gymnastics on your own, but it's like, okay, you see some of this tension, right? Tommy took over as the leader of the team, and even though they had worked together when Jason was the Gold Ranger, and they were fine. But it's like, okay, a little bit something going on there. So it was nice to see that kind of come to light.
You know what we didn't talk about, now that I think about it, is it's really funny when you think about it in the context of Zordon telling them that they need to go to this faraway island and cross the ocean, and then he's like, so here's some cars.
Yeah. Yeah. So we talked about Turbo, to me, feeling like a step down from Zeo. But here's the other big thing. It felt like there was this thematic dissonance in watching it, because on the one hand, you have this whole nautical theme with a space pirate and the ghost ship and all this stuff. And it's like, okay. And like you said, really leaning into the wizard and the fantasy, that whole aspect of it. So we've got this nautical fantasy side, and it's like, okay. And then Turbo Rangers with cars.
Yeah.
It just, now look, in the Zeo season, they were dealing with the Mondo and the Machine Empire. I don't know. If they had been in cars in that season, I would have been like, okay, that tracks a little bit more. But yeah, that's the thing. It just did not sync up. I think that was one, and it took me a while to really figure out what was bugging me as I was watching. But it's just like, why? It just does not fit.
I never thought about that. You make a very good point that if they were like pirate ship rangers or something. That would have been, Power Rangers High Seas or whatever. It would have been a little bit more in theme. The cars also look like shit. We haven't talked about that. They're not. They don't look great. They don't look like cars. You know what I mean? Like you could stare at them and there's just some weird. Um, there's some weird uncanny valley to them. They look too plasticky. They look like blown up toys because that's what they're trying to sell, or they look like the toy like car that you would sit outside of a McDonald's in and put a coin in and it would like rock back and forth. You know what I mean? They look really really cheap.
Yes. And they're right. They start off normal car sized, right? And then they grow. I don't like that
Correct.
either. I don't know. They're
Me
Zords.
either.
They're supposed to be
Yeah.
larger than life. So yeah, I don't know. It was tough. That definitely. I feel it just. And I look. I know what they had to work with, but kind of on that note, and this is a good time to jump to talking about Divatox, the villain of the piece. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but she's original to the show, right? That she doesn't have a Super
Yeah,
Sentai
yeah.
counterpart. Yeah,
I believe so. I don't know enough about Super Sentai to say that, so someone's probably screaming into their podcast device right now. But as far as I know, yes, she's unique to the show.
yeah. So it's like I don't know. They had some flexibility, I guess, as far as where they were going to go. So it's like they knew they had cars, and they were like, all right, we'll really lean into this pirate angle. But on the note of Divatox, so played by Hilary Shepard in the movie, and then by the time the Turbo season starts, Claire Hoyt is playing the character because, as I read, Hilary Shepard was pregnant, right? So she was kind of out for a while. But then, and Claire Hoyt
She
also
comes
played
back at
Demetria.
some point.
But yeah, then she comes back and she takes back over the role. But that's who we have Hilary Shepard as Divatox in the movie. I I have to say, I went into this really expecting not to care too much for Divatox. I came around on her. How do you feel?
She knows exactly what movie she's in. Like
Right?
she
She
really,
understood
really
the
knows
assignment.
exactly what movie she's in. She's hamming it up. It's very hard. I mean, look, it's very hard to top Ivan Ooze, one of cinema's greatest villains, if you ask me.
Yes.
Uh, but she's really holding her own, and she's punching above the movie's weight class in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's a good way. That's a good way to put it. It's also, when we talked about the '95 movie, you look at Dulcia, the very scantily clad Dulcia, and similarly here. But I feel like I was thinking about this because with Dulcia, she's never played in a sexy way. Like they never lean into that. She appears that way, but that's sort of it. Whereas here, I feel like there was far more of a
Well,
sexual vibe to
you
Diva
gotta have
Talks.
something for the dads. The dads are taking the kids to the movies. You gotta give them all something.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like watching it now, I'm like, all right, it's not my favorite part of the. I don't. This isn't my favorite movie, but I was like, okay, the Diva Talks. I can get on board here. So at least, yeah, she definitely provided some entertainment value for sure.
What I was actually really fascinated by in my research, because as I'm watching this, I'm thinking to myself, the puppetry work and the costume work on the monsters and stuff in this movie is really excellent. Actually, like it's really really good. So I look up who did you come across this at all? Who did the costumes for these movies?
No, I
For
don't
this
think I
movie in
did.
particular?
No.
It's the Chiodo brothers, who, if you're familiar with them, they're like legendary special effects people. They did like Critters, they did Killer Clowns from Outer Space, they did like Team America World Police. They're like legendary special effects guys. So I was like, it's really weird that their IMDb pedigree has all of that stuff, and then Turbo, a Power Rangers movie. But like Ernest Scared Stupid is another one. If you know like that, the creatures from that movie are horrifying. So yeah, like there's some pedigree there to a lot of the costumes in this movie.
Yeah, that's cool. No, I dig that. I know we've been focusing, and I've been focusing on a lot of what I didn't like. Is there anything else about the movie that you did like?
Um, I think ultimately what I keep coming back to is this notion of like a big epic quest that we have sent the Power Rangers on. And the first movie has this too, but there's a movie in here that is excellent, that is high adventure. that Raiders of the Lost Ark thing that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg always talk about. And believe me, I am not comparing Raiders of the Lost Ark to Turbo, a Power Rangers movie. But when they talk about Raiders, they always said, we're going to make a movie of all the best parts. And every 5 to 7 minutes or whatever, something is going to happen. Some big set piece is going to happen. And it feels like that was the original intent of this movie. And then it kept getting scaled back and changed and scaled back. And we have what we have here. But there is something cool there that I would have really, really liked to see that we didn't actually get. So I think the thing that I like about this movie the most is what it could have been. What it is not very good, but I do have a lot of nostalgia for it. The fight scene at the end is pretty lackluster. We talked about sort of the Zords not looking great. I still take them over the CGI Zords from the 95 movie, which is maybe the worst CGI in any movie ever made.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really, really low bar on that. But even still, like you get the Megazord, they push him off a cliff. It takes all of about 45 seconds, and we get the hero pose, and it's over. Which, was kind of a bummer because there isn't really an actual ton of like Power Ranger action in this movie, which we talked about before. Like they morph in the jungle. They're in the cave. They fight a little bit. They're out. We've got a Megazord. There actually is one shot in this movie that is actually pretty inspired from an action choreography perspective that I really like. So I'm just going to tangent for a second. When they finally do morph in the jungle and they're running and like the camera work is making them seem like it's really fast. There's one very, very cool shot where like the camera's on the ground looking like at a log. Do you know what I'm talking about? And like Tommy races by, and then in frame, the other 4 of them like flip over the log one by one. And it's just like a very well choreographed, very cool shot. And I was like, if the movie was more of this, it would be awesome. And then none of it happens ever again for the rest of the runtime.
No, that was cool, and I'm glad you mentioned that because that was one thing that stood out in the movie, but then especially in the show, you really do see them moving at super speed as the Turbo Rangers. So I was like, okay, that's a little different, and I say leaning into this whole idea of them ripping some velocity, even outside of the Zords. One thing. Not to keep comparing it to the 95 movie, but I feel like it's natural to compare these two
right?
big screen outings. And the other thing I kept coming back to was, and I know for all of us who watched that 95 movie as kids, seeing Zordon lying there at the base of his shattered tube was shocking, right? But it makes you appreciate how, again, in a certain sense, these movies are very similar, right? There's these epic quests, right? In the one movie to get new powers, here it's to rescue their friends. But the threat of Zordon dying, right? Like if they don't get these powers and stop Ivanus in time, they're going to lose their mentor Zordon. And even though you figure, okay, it'll probably be all right, the stakes feel like they're there in that 95 movie. And again, it doesn't take much. It's just like we have to save Zordon. And I know here they had to save Jason and Kimberly, but it didn't have the same sense of urgency. Right.
The movie doesn't make you feel it. Like the movie doesn't give you anything with them to latch onto, right? First of all, they're scuba diving at night. What are they looking at? What's the point here? I don't understand. And then they get captured and they're in a cage and then they're in another cage. And like the movie doesn't really give you any emotional resonance for their capture or why we need to save them. Our heroes see them on a TV screen for like 5 seconds, and then that's it, really. And then they're reunited when they're reunited. Like the father figure here, like wasting away into death, is a very striking image too in the movie. I like that's seared into my brain. Him in this weird little gray, snuggie, like laying there all decrepit and stuff. Like I don't know, it's just it doesn't sit right with me. It's still it still gets to me.
I know. Even, me and our mutual friend, Chris Wilcock, who's been on the show before, we did an episode of one of my other podcast series. We're talking about the 95 movie years ago. We did that. And then on this show, I did another episode on it. And so I've revisited that 95 movie a couple of times in recent years as an adult. And still, even as an adult, as I'm watching it, it's like, oh my God, it's Zordon. It's like, that's what he's like when he's not in that tube. But it's just, there was something so visceral about it. And yeah, so again, that's all to say that a little bit goes a long way, just in terms of really making me care and making me feel like there's some urgency. There's really something behind what's going on. And so watching this, it's like, yeah, okay, they had to save Kimberly and Jason, but it didn't feel the same. And it was great to see the two of them back, especially Kimberly, who we hadn't seen since she left in a different shade of pink. So it was awesome to have her back. But yeah, I mean, I don't feel they used them to the effect that they could have. We did get more Bulk and Skull in this movie than we did in the 95 movie, for better or worse.
Yeah, you're not a big Bulk and Skull guy, right?
I've come around a lot on them, actually. I really, really have over the course of doing all of these episodes. Would I say like, oh, I'm a diehard Bulk and Skull fan? No, but I appreciate them and their value and the function that they serve a lot more than I ever did before. So yeah, they're having them in here more. But again, here too, I feel like I don't know. I wanted a different kind of movie. So when Kimberly and Jason and Bulk and Skull are all trapped in the what's it called, the subcraft? I think that's the name of it.
Yeah,
right?
I think so. Yeah.
And Bulk and Skull's brains have been scrambled. So Skull thinks he's Antonio Bandana, and he's talking in a Spanish accent, and Bulk thinks he's German, right? And they're doing these accents and everything. It's fine, but it would have been, I don't know, it would have been so interesting to me to actually do like a mini bottle episode within this larger movie where, I don't know, you have some sort of conversation between Jason and Kimberly and Bulk and Skull where they talk about all the things like you never thought they would talk about. I don't know. I just feel like it would have been interesting to get something there.
And they have to work together to get out of there. It would have been cool. Making Bulk and Skull into police officers is pretty truly inspired meta commentary on Power Rangers' behalf about what happens to your high school bullies. Like really, really smart meta commentary for the 90s.
That is a great point. And also too, so when we had left Bulk and Skull at the end of Zeo, right, or even before the end of Zeo, they and Lieutenant Stone had been kicked off the force. They were private investigators, and then at the very end of Zeo, they were given this mission or case to investigate in France, right? And they were going to be gone. And then here in the movie, all three of them are back on the force. There's just a quick line like, "We're lucky that they rehired us," and they're at the baseball stadium. And then, of course, very early on in the Turbo season, they are turned into chimps. Right. And remain that way for a while.
I forgot about that. So thank you for bringing that back into my consciousness this week.
Now, I understand that Paul Schreier and Jason Narby, they were working on a Bulk and Skull spinoff during this period of time that never came to fruition. But that's why Bulk and Skull were turned into chimps. And you still hear their voices. No one can understand them, but the audience does. So we hear their voices. But that's why they're not physically there for that first chunk of the Turbo season.
Do you know how long they were chimps?
It's I think it's a decent stretch. I mean, I don't know, 10 episodes, something like that.
That's a lot. That's a lot for a bit like that.
Yeah, no doubt. Are you disappointed that the Bulk and Skull show never happened?
I mean, yeah, I probably would have enjoyed seeing what it was. Is anybody clamoring for that? Not really, But it would have been interesting to see.
I think the premise was that they were managing a hotel or something like that. It was something like that.
That's insane.
As I understand it, I don't think anything was ever actually filmed. There was that Bulk and Skull VHS that they put out. There was an original framing device where the Power Rangers are battling outside and Bulk and Skull are trapped in a cave while this battle is going on, and then they reminisce about all the adventures that they've had. So it's just essentially a clip show focusing on Bulk and Skull, and the idea was to test the market. Was there an appetite for Bulk and Skull centric content? And because Jason Narvi has talked about this, I guess it didn't sell very well, and that sort of put the kibosh on the planned spinoff. But that at least accounts for what was going on with them.
It's like that Lone Gunman spinoff for the X-Files that ran for like half a season or whatever. Everyone was like, the Lone Gunman spinoff's going to be huge. And then it wasn't. And then they were back on the show before you knew it.
Yeah. Yeah, essentially. The movie also gives us the last appearance of Ernie.
Yep. Yeah, I read that. I didn't realize that. And also, he's not even in the movie. He's sitting in the stands at the very end for 5 seconds. And that's all you get of Ernie as a picture wrap on old Ern.
I know. I mean, I realized this earlier on in doing this podcast, but yeah, the actor passed away, and I think
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I think he had health issues. I think that's why he left the show when he did.
Right.
And Lieutenant Stone takes over as owner of the juice bar, I think in episode 4 or 5 of Turbo.
Is Ernie in all the way to the end of Zio? I don't remember, and you probably revisited that a little bit more recently than me.
Yeah, he's there, and at that point, he's opened like an outdoor cafe. Well, there's the outdoor cafe, but then also in Zio, I think he's like set up shop on the beach too. I remember seeing him out there. So yeah, he was there through Zio, and then yeah, just for that fleeting moment. Although he probably has a ton of deleted scenes in Turbo too.
Probably. Who knows? There's apparently a lot of that stuff. That Ernie opening like a cafe on the beach is such a 90s sitcom thing to do of like how do we get all of our characters to stick around in whatever landscape we're putting them in. It's like when all of the Bayside kids on Saved by the Bell went to work at the beach for the summer and Mr. Belding was still there somehow. Their high school principal came with them.
No, wait, he didn't come for that, right? I'm almost positive because they had Mr. Carosi. He was the
Yes.
Leon
Oh,
Remini's
yes,
father.
you're right. Yeah, no, you are right. I'm thinking of something else though, where that has happened on sitcoms, and then Belding is not on the college years. I don't know. We're getting into a weird tangent. I stepped in it here, and it's my own fault.
We in a couple of episodes ago, Saved by the Bell came up, so it's only natural.
I remember what it was. It was the Hawaiian Vacation Saved by the Bell TV movie, where their high
Gotcha.
school principal goes to Hawaii with them.
As one does.
Podcast audience, I corrected myself. Please don't at me.
So if there's anything else about the movie, we can definitely jump back. But I do just want to at least touch on these episodes of the Turbo season that we that we watched. So, well, let me throw it to you first. I mean, especially from that initial shift into Turbo arc. I mean, what stood out to you about that?
Nothing much from the Turbo arc itself. It does a pretty decent job of just picking up where the movie left off, especially that half of that first episode's runtime is just recapping the movie over the song. We didn't even talk about the song. The song slaps. I'm gonna put it out there right now. The song slaps, and I'm here for it. And when they play it over and over again, I don't get tired of it. It's great.
The music of Power Rangers always delivers. No matter what else is going on in these things, the music is always good. I agree.
But nothing really stuck out to me about shifting to Turbo other than just continuing along the Justin story arc and setting the table and a weird kind of send off for Rocky, and then it's just kind of we're off to the races here. And oh no, actually one thing did stand out to me. I forgot. Tommy's really into stock car racing now. All of a sudden, he got this opportunity with his uncle. He couldn't pass it up. Of course, he loves race cars. Is he the most interesting man in the world, right? Because he's like a 5-time black belt karate dojo owner. He's one of the best stock car racers on the planet. He later on, when he comes back, he's a PhD in paleontology. The dude's got it all.
And he went to MIT, right? Isn't that the backstory when he comes back?
I think so. Yeah. Yep.
And then there's also that interlude in Forever Red where he seems to be Bulk and Skull's boss at this resort. Where I don't know if we ever get like a firm answer on that. A man of many talents. I mean, there's at least one episode of Mighty Morphin where he was interested in a car. It wasn't a huge plot point, but like he showed some interest. So all right, I guess.
Sure.
I think what stood out. This made me laugh, man. So Diva Talk. So Diva Talks 2.0, right? We have the new actress Claire Hoyt. She was good. I don't think she was as effective.
Not as good. Yeah, exactly.
But her whole motivation, her agenda in that 3-parter is that the Rangers in the movie interrupted her planned marriage to Malagor, right? So she wants to ruin an occasion in their lives. So she's going to mess up their high school graduation. And the way she's going to do it is she's going to have her minions plant a bomb at the power plant to knock out the electricity during their ceremony, which is outside. So it's like, all you have to do is like, all you have to do is like cut the wire to the sound system. That's it. It was, and when they plant the bomb, the countdown is for like a half hour. I mean, you want to give them a little more time to stop you? Jesus.
I did not even pick up on that. I admit, we've talked about this a little bit in the previous episode, but trying to watch episodes of Power Rangers when you are 35 years old, it it's really difficult. Like it's not the easiest thing in the world to focus on. It does not really hold your attention, and I'd be lying to myself if I didn't spend a lot of watching these episodes on my phone.
I understand. I understand. I there were a couple of points where I did watch it on like 1.5 speed. I was just like, okay,
Just,
we could
guys,
just
I gotta
like
get through this shit, please.
we could get through this. I
This
had
didn't
look,
need to be a 3-parter. This is 1.5 episodes of plot.
yes. But every time they cut to that countdown, that timer, and it's just like, how much time are you giving them? We set it for like 10 seconds. But anyway, that just made me laugh. It just felt like, but I don't know. On the one hand, there's something oddly charming about Divatox. It's like your aspirations are small. They're very small. It's like, but there was something kind of
No,
refreshing about it.
no sky portal here. No like army of CGI minions. We're just gonna put a bomb somewhere and call it a day.
Yeah, I don't know. So, and also, I assume this was a scheduling thing. So the whole thing is that the Rangers, they're finally graduating high school, right? So Adam, Rocky, Tanya, and Kat are there, and Justin's there to cheer them on. But Tommy, we're told, already picked up his diploma, right? And he's off on the racetrack. And which is fine, but I was just like, why wouldn't he be there for his friends if nothing else? And all this is where I look,
Sure.
I'm overthinking this and I'm nitpicking. They have teleporters. So I don't understand. Like he could have just popped right over there, been part of the ceremony, cheered his friends on. That's why I'm wondering if maybe that was a scheduling thing where they, because it's
It
very,
had
very
to be.
little, very minimal Tommy, especially in the first one, or in the like you see him like just kind of in the car for a little bit. And that's about it.
Well, we'll talk about this when we get into passing the torch. But he wanted out by this point too, so he probably had very limited dates here. Like we've got Jason David Frank for X number of days, and we're going to use them to the fullest extent and not waste him.
Yeah. No, no, no. I think that's fair. And then I guess the other big thing at the end of this three-parter, which then will segue us into the passing the torch two-parter, is Zordon and Alpha 5 depart.
Kaput.
How did
They're
you
leaving.
feel how did you feel about that, especially at the time?
Um, it's weird. I kind of was in and out a little bit on this, and so I kind of just like took it as oh, well, I guess they're gone now. But looking back on it as I got older, it was like that really stinks, and they don't really get an exit. It's not emotion. It's not even emotionally satisfying by the standards at which the show provides emotional satisfaction. They're just kind of like, we're gone now. See ya. And then they leave. So, Zordon gives a little bit of a speech about how great they are and how much they mean to him and things like that, but could have been done better.
Yeah, it's also too this whole thing. He's trapped in an interdimensional time warp, so it always felt like he was stuck. But it's like no, now he can go. I don't know, but it's and then Dimitri, we get Dimitri and Alpha 6, and so Dimitri was also played by Claire Hoyt, and I was reading, I guess the intention, or at least the speculation, I think the intention was that the Divatox and Dimitri would be twin sisters, but they didn't do that. But then they used the sister angle in space, right, with Andros and what's her name, Andromeda,
Astronema.
Astronomer, Andromeda, Astronomer. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't. I'm trying to imagine how I would feel watching it as a kid. And where I kind of land between the movie and then what I have seen of Turbo, I think I can save this for the end of our episode, but I'll say it now. I think ultimately I'm glad I stopped watching when I did for whatever reason
Sure.
that I can't remember. But I'm glad that I stopped with Zio because it's always been this thing looking back where it's like I have fond memories of all of it, including Zio, the last portion that I watched, and it's always been this sort of thing of like, oh yeah, I wonder why I stopped watching. I must have lost interest. I wonder if I had continued through Turbo, especially fourth grade into fifth grade as I was getting older, if I really would have like soured on it and then looked back and have been like, oh yeah, Power Rangers, right? Whereas I had this beautiful memory of having so much fun with all of what I had experienced of it. So ultimately, I'm glad I stopped where I did. I don't know that this season would have worked for me even as a kid at the time.
It didn't work for me either at the time, and I was very in and out on this too. So I can tell you right now, I definitely have not seen every episode of this show. I only knew about passing the torch retroactively. Like I was already kind of out on it by then, and then they hooked me again. They hooked me back in a little bit with Space. I was like, oh, like I never really saw a lot of that latter half of Turbo after Tommy had left. It's not very good. As far as the fandom goes, it doesn't really hold a lot of water, and it's pretty well maligned by those like hardcore fans.
That's the sense I've gotten as well. This is, not a particularly well regarded season, and I get why. I know people love In Space, and I've really not done a dive into that. But what I have read about and what I have seen, and what I've heard from you and from others,
Pretty good.
Yeah,
Pretty good.
And I'm glad that they rebounded and they were able to bring that 6-season Zordon era to a close effectively. So I'm happy for that. I guess maybe this answers this if you were already kind of out by the time of passing the torch. But did you know that the Rangers were leaving? Like how, or that?
I didn't. I think by that point I was already kind of like half watching the show, and then I would probably would have tuned in at one point and be like, oh, these are new people. I guess they brought in new people, and that was really it. So by that time that Tommy leaving aired, I had been kind of one foot out the door. So I don't even really remember it happening at that age.
So, yeah, over the course of the show, we've been following the arc specifically of Tommy. We started with Green with Evil, and, we've touched on other aspects of the franchise, but kind of the through line has been following Tommy's journey. And yes, he will pop back up for Forever Red and various other reunion specials, and most notably in the Dino Thunder season. But this passing the torch two-parter in Turbo marks his departure from the franchise for a significant period of time. And like I said, I mean, the first time that I watched it, I only had kind of known this is where it happens. But how do you feel they handled the departure of Tommy, Adam, Kat, and Tanya?
Really poorly. Like probably can't think of a worse way to have a send off for your core cast here. It's real half baked. There's no emotional send off for this at all. The introduction of the new characters is really bad too, and it's like you obviously can't help but compare the new characters to the old characters, and the way that they're introduced to you. How could anybody like them, really? And I mean, they went on to go be good characters, and they have a whole latter half season of Turbo, and that is the core cast for In Space, minus Justin and with the addition of their Red Rangers. So like you do get character arcs for a lot of these people, but I had never until I watched it for this show, I had never seen those episodes where they're actually introduced, and I was flabbergasted at how badly they were introduced.
Yeah, so if I'm not mistaken, TJ and Cassie, I think they're the ones who we meet on the bus, and I believe that this was their first episode. But if I'm not mistaken, I think Carlos and
Ashley,
thank you, they had been established previously, right?
But very briefly in a couple of earlier episodes. They'll have a scene here or there, and I didn't actually go back and find those episodes or those scenes. The show just insinuates that you know who they are when they pop up in the second part of that.
Yeah, it's one of those things. So, yeah, right, I think it's been clear that Jason David Frank had wanted to leave, but I don't know necessarily that the others did as well.
They did not.
So it's interesting, and I'm sure, again, we circle back to budget, salary, all of that. But, yeah, I mean, it's certainly a choice, right? Because this could have been the departure of Tommy, and you keep some familiar faces and you bring in a new leader, or Adam steps up as leader, or Kat, it could, and any of them could be the leader, not Justin. So they could have done something like that, but they were just like, nope, all of them out, except Justin, who does get to stay. So, but yeah, I mean, watching it, the thrust of the two-parter is that Divatox's mother appears to her in a dream or vision and gives her the idea, if you want to take out the Rangers, you go for the leader. As if you couldn't figure this out on your own. We're 20 episodes into this season. It only just occurred to you now?
She's too busy putting bombs at the power plant.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, still working on that one. And so the Piranatrons, we haven't even mentioned them, but the equivalent of the Putties and the Tengu Warriors and the
cool look.
The
Big
Cogs.
fan of the look.
Yeah.
I think I like them more than the Cogs. Obviously I've got a lot of nostalgia for the Putties and the Tengu Warriors, but the Piranhatrons, they look pretty cool. I'm a fan.
Nice. Yeah. I'm cool with them. I thought they were fine. But yeah, so they attack Tommy and Kat while they're on their way camping. Where I guess we find out in this two-parter, unless it was said anywhere else in the franchise, maybe I missed it. Tommy's late all the time. All of a sudden, it felt like that was a thing. I don't know. Maybe it had been established before, but yeah, they're camping and they get attacked, and that's when again TJ and Cassie rescue them. There's this those two are both on their way to the Angel Grove on the bus, and then they intervene to help Kat and Tommy. And after they're fighting the Piranhatrons and they have a moment to breathe, TJ says to Cassie, like, "How'd you know how to do that?" And Cassie's like, "Oh, my ancestors invented it." It's like, really? That's your answer for how you know martial arts? I'm Asian? That's like, I know this was a different era, but it's like, guys, come on. Like, the way that works is if you're even going to venture into that territory, and best to just avoid it altogether. But if you are, maybe she could say my ancestors invented it. And then he looks at her and she's like, "No, dummy. Like my parents wanted me to take
I took
self-defense
karate.
class." Yeah. And also, so not only the racial stereotype component, but also the, just sort of the male female divide. She doesn't ask him how he knows. Like, there's no question of how he would know how to. He's a baseball player. It's like, why would he know martial arts automatically? Anyway, that just stood out as I was watching it.
I'm sure that had she asked him, it would have been an equally terrible racial stereotype for how he learned martial arts.
Yeah, but I was watching. I was like, really? Because it was interesting for all these episodes that I've rewatched. And either I'm blanking or they happened more in episodes that I didn't rewatch. You don't encounter a ton of that, I found, at least. So when that scene came up, I was like, "Oh, really? Like, you guys do better than that."
They really do everything possible to make you not like either of them.
Yeah, I mean, I will say the fact that both of them, TJ first and then Cassie, they can't. Like, they're just unable to let people be in danger and not try to help, right? So that aspect,
Power Ranger equalities for sure.
At least there's that. Carlos and Ashley, they don't seem to have to do much to prove themselves. They just sort of usher people during the crisis. It's like, all right, I guess that's enough. You know what was odd to me watching this? So, if I'm not mistaken, there's no mention of those Rangers leaving before this two-parter, right? No. And so it's like the Rangers have, like, it's known to the characters that this is the end and they're selecting their replacements. But it's like the audience, like, we don't know until those last couple of minutes.
Until it happens. Yeah. There's no narrative reason given for why they have to train a replacement or pick a replacement or why they're leaving or why they can't be Power Rangers anymore. And Hourglass just shows up. And then it's like, well, we got to do this before the hourglass runs out, and no explanation is given whatsoever about where that came from or why.
Yeah, I don't know. It is unfortunate because this is very truly the end of an era of the show. Yeah. Because they did this.
It feels like such an editorial mandate. Like, you're a comic book guy. We've talked about comic books so much. This feels like when a character needs to die because of something else going on in the big main event book, or in this case, because they didn't want to pay their actors what they were probably owed. And it feels, it's sad. It feels like a really bad cop-out for not only how long that franchise had been going, but especially for Jason David Frank, who, history will have told that he came back at a later point, but we didn't know that for 15 years at this point, from there. So, like, not giving him any kind of real goodbye is really, really unfortunate, even in retrospect, looking at this in a vacuum.
Totally. When I was watching it on my iPad, and there's I think the final scene with Diva Talks where she's talking to her mother again. And I checked, I was like, how much time is left? And it was like 2 minutes. I was like, this is all the time that was reserved for this. We had passed the point of having any original cast members on the show, but Jason David Frank was there very early on, and we always kind of consider him part of that original group, and And Adam was, in that first replacement group, and Kat not too long after, and Tanya we had spent all of Zio and Turbo with. So they all had long tenures, and for all of them, even if it had just been Jason David Frank, he still deserved more of a send off. But especially that it's all of them, it
Yep.
just it just I don't know, it felt odd. And going back to when you're talking about Zordon leaving and not really having much of an impact, I think one of the things that just felt odd was, and again, I think this was probably scheduling and Jason David Frank not being available, because in that episode, Tommy shows up for the farewell, and Zordon's like, "Oh, we already told him that we're leaving." It's like, oh, okay, it's like fine, I guess, but it just it just robs that moment, right? I think of the
Yep.
weight that it could have. So
And it is a kids show. We've talked about this before, but it doesn't need to talk down to the audience. And in the way that it sort of short shrifts these goodbyes, it does feel like it's talking down to the audience here. Or the hourglass thing especially is pretty glaring in that it's the show telling you that we don't think kids are going to understand this, so we need to put some kind of like stakes wrapper around it. You didn't need that. You could have done a million other things. It's also particularly upsetting for Adam. I think he's one of those characters that I have, as I've gotten older, really really grown to like, and I think he might actually be my favorite Power Ranger when you really get down to it. And he gets really, really shortchanged because, yes, he's sort of in that periphery. He wasn't there from the beginning, but he is in that first replacement cast, and he was there for a ton of it. He's the only other one besides Jason David Frank that's in both movies, right? Like he is as much of a core sort of member of that cast as anybody, and he really gets kind of cast aside, no pun intended. He was also one of the ones who didn't want to leave, and I was doing a little digging on this. You may have found this, that they didn't know, and they only learned when someone showed them the newspaper ad of them looking for new Power Rangers, which is really really messed up.
I know, I saw that too. I know that's so bad. I mean, I think at this point we've heard enough about how things were run behind the scenes where it's not so shocking, but it's like, really? I know. No, I'm a big Adam fan too. When the Once and Always special was coming out, and we saw we knew Jason David Frank wasn't in it. It was filmed before his death, but we knew he had decided not to do it. But you saw that the Green Ranger was there, and people were speculating how are they going to handle this. And of course, it's Tommy under there. You just don't see him, but people were speculating like who could it be, and one of the suggestions, and I would have been on board with this if it had been Adam who was serving as the Mighty Morphin Green Ranger. And it's like, that might sound like a crazy thing to say because it's like, it can only be Tommy. But it's like, if it's going to be anyone else, it's like, I would buy Adam, who has been a Green Ranger. Like, I would buy
Yeah,
him in that for
correct.
sure.
Yeah, he was always really cool. He was fun. He was funny. He was down to earth. I just always really identified with him, and as I've gotten older, I've really, really grown to appreciate him. And Johnny Young Bosch has gone on to have a really tremendous career post Power Rangers, which is not something you can say for everybody who's on the show, which is sad. But he's had an incredibly prolific voice acting career.
He has. I got to interview him and Catherine Sutherland at our mutual friend Chris Wilcox Undiscovered Realm Comic Con a few years ago. I think the last one before COVID. And it was great. Like, it was so fun. We did one panel with the two of them, and then I did one with just him, and we talked about his voice acting career. And then the fire alarm went off, and we had to stop. But
Okay, great.
it was so cool. And obviously I've been looking up all of these people on IMDb as I've been doing these episodes, and you know the fact is, in a lot of cases, there's not a lot to scroll through, right? But with Johnny Young Bosch, you go to his IMDb page. It's like
Just
I have
keeps
to.
going.
Yeah, it's like I have to search when I wanted to see like, okay, what episodes did he return for. Like, I had to search for Adam for Power Rangers because otherwise it would have been too long to go through everything. So
It's
yeah,
those anime voice actors, man. They've got IMDb credits for days.
yeah. And in that farewell scene, again, I don't mean to like harp on this so much, but the fact that the last shot is of the new team, and I know the feeling, I'm sure, was like, well, hey, we want people to keep watching, right? So we want to end on, like, I get that, but it's like, I don't know. I feel like you owe the original cast the last shot of the episode.
It's also really morbid watching them hand over the reins, knowing what you know about how it went down behind the scenes, and to have them all step forward and say something about their replacement feels really, really morbid.
That's a good point because when Kimberly left, right, Amy Jo Johnson wanted to leave the show, and it was that was probably the best send off and transition we got because everyone was on the same page, right? With Jason, Zach, and Trini, at least they weren't there. It's like, it's like, and of course it was awkward to see how they worked it out, but they did what they had to do. But they weren't there. This I know was this weird in between where it's like they're participating in a farewell, unlike Jason, Zach, and Trini, that they don't want, unlike Amy Jo Johnson. So it's this weird sort of in between. I know it's unfortunate.
You know what's interesting to think about too, in now that I'm thinking about this, is that that's probably the last time there ever was a send off of any kind, really, because you send you Turbo ends, they do Space, and then after Space, it's just new team every season.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I did again. I've watched clips here and there on YouTube, so I know when we get to the end of Turbo, Justin gets left behind. I don't know if that counts as a full send off. This poor kid standing there blasting off. I know he comes back for one episode in Space, right?
He does? I didn't even know that.
He does come back for one episode, and he pilots his Turbo Zord, and he morphs and everything, and you see him with his dad, and yeah. And he meets Andros. Like I was just kind of like skimming through the episode quickly, but yeah. So there's a nice little, at least little coda for his character. So
have you gotten around to watching the In Space episode where they fight the Ninja Turtles?
No, I have not. I am aware of it. Yeah, you know what?
It's really cool.
I will have to at least check that out. I'm not the biggest Turtles guy. I was into it to an extent as a kid, but it was never as big a thing for me as it was for so many others. But that would still be cool to see.
It is the Bad Turtles show with Venus de Milo, which was also a Saban brand product, which is why we got that crossover and probably never will again. But it is an interesting relic of brand assurance times gone by.
Gotcha. I want to let you go. I don't want to keep you too long, but I guess my second to last question is of the replacement cast who were with for the rest of Turbo and then In Space, of what you've seen, any favorites? Were there any of those characters you were like, I really grew to love them?
That's hard because they all really are kind of blank ciphers to a certain extent, and when I watched In Space, the Andros Andromeda dynamic is really what I latched onto. So like none of those Turbo holdover characters really popped for me too hard. But probably Cassie, actually. She sticks out a little bit more from the pack, I think, than the other three.
Nice. That's cool. And I know, just while we're on the subject of Space for a second here, and we've touched on this at various points in our episodes, I know at the end, of course, Andros destroys Zordon's tube, releasing his wave of good energy that purifies the evil in the universe. I rewatched that little snippet last night. One of the villains who is purified is Divatox. So we get that conclusion to her character at that point.
Yeah, and she's around a little bit in Space from what I remember too. So there's some continuity there too, and we've talked about how that's sort of the end of that whole 6-year saga, for better or worse. Cool.
So is there anything from the Turbo movie or these Turbo episodes you wanted to talk about that we didn't?
I don't think so. I mean, we talked on the hilarity of the "Let's rip some velocity" line, which is real bad, but yet also kind of works. I just can't say enough good things about the sequence of them all driving through the desert while they're like powering up the Zords and red lightning ready to bolt, and then the music plays. It's so cheesy, and it still gave me chills. I'm not gonna lie, it still worked for me as good as it did the first day.
Nice. No, I'm glad that this still holds some meaning for you, even as we recognize its shortcomings, but I'm glad that it still does that. And for me, like I said, I appreciated the sense of adventure that it went for. Justin was not as annoying as I thought he would be. It was cool seeing Jason and Kimberly again. I think those were the things that I liked about it.
Totally.
Would love at some point to see the deleted scenes. It is astounding to me that they have not popped up anywhere, right? And again, like I knew they weren't on. I have the Blu-ray, and I knew they weren't on there. But I, like yourself, I was thinking like looking on Reddit. I'm like, these have to be somewhere.
Gotta be somewhere, yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe one day they'll see the light of day. That would be pretty fascinating. But for now, all we have is speculation and what we've learned from those images and scripts and things like that.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Where would you like to direct folks if they want to follow you or connect with you online?
Oh yeah, thanks. You could find me on any social media platform at Delando Calrissian. I am most active on Instagram, posting a lot of stupid memes. So please, by all means, check me out there. Other than that, I hope everyone buys tickets to New York Comic Con this year. That is my one wish and hope.
Very nice. I hope everyone will do that. Thank you very much for coming back. It's always fun to talk with you generally and especially about Power Rangers.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, dude.
My pleasure. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, audience. This was our second to last episode. So in 2 weeks, make sure you come back for the series finale of Summoning the Zords. I'll be joined by returning guest Lance Laster, and we'll be considering the legacy of Tommy Oliver and looking at his return appearances in Forever Red, Dino Thunder, and also looking at the Soul of the Dragon original graphic novel. So if you've been with us for any stretch of episodes, you don't want to miss our series finale. And of course, once a Ranger fan, always a Ranger fan. This show is part of the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network, home to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman, Summoning the Zords, and My Comic Shop History, available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review today. Sign up at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato for additional content. Thank you all